Happy Monday, knitters. I'm Louise from Wildflower Wool, and welcome back to my channel. I went live earlier tonight, and we talked about the whole knitting podcast. I rewatched it back, and I was not happy with the quality. We had some technical issues, so I thought I'm going to come right back on here, re-record, and try this one more time. So if you're seeing this again, that is why you're seeing it double. And if you're just finding it for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. So the New Start Monday Knits podcast, I pick a new yarn every week out of my stash. Sometimes it's a new purchase. I put it on my Instagram stories and have you guys pick what yarn I'm going to be knitting for the week. Then the rest of the podcast focuses on it's like a little mini knitting workshop. That's what this podcast has evolved into over the last month or so. And it has been a lot of fun. Me demonstrating and talking about one or two different knitting techniques. So what we're going to work on tonight is, I will tell you which yarn won in the Instagram stories. We're going to talk about the Turkish Cast On, and I will demonstrate it for you. And we're going to talk about knitting backwards, which I want to add in here is totally different from left-handed knitting. When I was talking about this live, I had said I wasn't entirely sure if it was the same as left-handed knitting, but I had thought it probably seemed like it probably could be. Well, Jennifer left me a comment on the original live, and she said, I don't think it is. She said, I've been told I knit left-handed, and it's different than what I do. So I did a little research, and yes, knitting backwards and knitting left-handed are two different things. So I wanted to clarify that. So let's start at the beginning here with the yarn. These two yarns I posted on Instagram stories and in my feed and asked which one should I cast on for a pair of shorty socks. They're both Patton's Croy sock yarn. This is 70 stripe and this is zebra stripe. It was pretty much hands down. Everybody voted for the 70 stripe. Aren't those colors fun? I'm going to use the Turkish Cast On that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes to cast on this pair of shorty socks. I'm excited. My co-host Cheryl from the Fiber Friends, she has already knit a pair of socks in this yarn, which is really what inspired me. You know, I saw her these stripes knitting up. I'm like, I have to have that yarn. I went to buy this for myself as a little Easter gift, and they only had one ball. And I thought, well, there we go. It's a shorty pair. You use what you have. And in this case, I only have one ball. So next week, I will come back and show you this cast on. I'm not going to say finished because it probably won't be finished. But at least it'll be started and we can take a look at how the Turkish Cast On looks in sock yarn. So let's go right into the Turkish Cast On. The way I do this cast on, I do it over two circular needles. They are both the same needle size, but two different needles. I like to use one that are easily distinguishable. So I've got a short one and I have a long one. You could have a metal needle and a wood needle. You could have one with a different colored cord. Anytime you're knitting on two circular needles, it's best to be able to easily identify your needle tips and which needle tip goes with which needle. So short and long, that's how I'm going to determine which needle I'm working with. This is a short tail cast on. So we just need a little length of yarn, just long enough to be able to darn your end in when you're finished your project. You're going to make a slip knot. And then we are going to slide this onto one of the needles. It doesn't matter which needle you start with or which needle the slip knot goes on. The slip knot is going to eventually come off. We're not going to count that in our stitch count. We're going to hold our needles one on top of the other. And we want our needle tips pointing to the left. I know this is backwards for you guys, so you're just going to have to try to visualize my perspective here as how you would be seeing this if you're doing this at home. Needle tips pointing to the left. We cast on half the number of stitches that we need for the project. So if you're wanting 30 stitches, we're going to wrap on 15 times. I'm going to say we want 16 stitches. I'm going to make 8 wraps. So don't wrap with your tail. Oh my gosh, how many times do we do this? I am forever picking up my tail. Craziness. Okay, I've got my working yarn. I'm going to wrap around 8 loops. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've got 8. We've got 8 loops on top plus 8 loops on the bottom equals the 16 that we want for our project. Just be careful with this last stitch because that last stitch is made just with the yarn going over those needle tips. So you want to hold on to that so it doesn't slip off and lose that end stitch. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to turn my work upside down. So if you take a quick look before I turn it upside down, see how I have the short needle or the one with the brown cable is on top and my long needles on bottom. I'm going to turn these end for end. I'm literally going to take my needle tips. I always think of it as turning it to the right so that now my long needle is on top. Still watching that first stitch so that it doesn't fall off. Now the needle on the bottom, we're not going to be using it. So just pull it out so that the bottom 8 stitches are just sitting on the cable. Long needles on top. Remember, I want to make sure that I'm working with its matching needle tip. The short needle, both needle tips of it are hanging down here. They're not going to be used at all right at this moment. It's just sitting there, just resting, just waiting. Now I've got 8 loops across the top of my needle. I'm going to knit those. The first stitch is a little tricky because it's really just a loop hanging there. You just kind of have to make it into a stitch. And then just work through all of those wraps and knit them. And we had 8 wraps, so there'll be 8 stitches. And that slip knot, I'm pretty sure I started with that slip knot does not get counted in our stitch count because we're going to pull it off when we come to it and just unravel it. So let's see what I put. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there I am at my slip knot. What we're going to do now is we are going to turn these needle tips upside down again. So I'm going to push that bottom needle in, and that slip knot that's right there, I'm just going to take it off and pull it out. Now needle tips, we're going to turn these again upside down, and the needle that is on the bottom, pull the needle tip through so the stitches are just sitting on that cable. I've got my short needle on top, so I'm going to make sure I've got the matching needle tip that I'm going to be working with. Bring that around, and then I'm going to work these last 8 stitches, and that is my tail. Twice now I've picked up my tail. Not good odds here. Okay, let me untangle this. Oh, it's because I've got a really long tail. That's probably why. Okay, so again, just double checking I've got the right end to go with my needle tip. And then I'm going to work across these stitches. This works up really easy. It's a good alternative if for some reason you don't want to do Judy's Magic Cast On. That has always been my go-to cast on for toe-up socks. I don't know if this is any better. It is just different and maybe a little less fiddly. I think it's always good to have options so you can pick and choose what you think is going to be good for you. What is, you know, somebody's favorite, another knitter's favorite cast on may not be yours. So there we are. So now, again, I can slide this needle tip in, and then I'm going to turn them upside down again. If we take a quick look, see one needle's shinier than the other. This is more of a metal, this is more of a plastic. I'm going to turn them upside down. So the plastic, the more gray colored needle, my longer needle tip, it's on top. The bottom needle pulls out and the stitches just hang on the cord. I find the end that matches my needle on top. And there's my working yarn, and I just keep knitting. At this point, when you're working your sock, you're going to start working some increases to make your toe. But I'll just knit across here one more time. I think, what do you think? Is it something you maybe want to try your next toe up if you just want to try something different? I find it definitely quicker and easier than the provisional tubular cast on for socks. Definitely quicker for that. So there we go. There is the right side. And at this point, I could start to, you know how you kind of, you fold your work up so you're making that cup, that toe. And just at that point where we can just start to do that. So that's the Turkish cast on. I give it a thumbs up. I think it is one that, well, I am going to try it on my new cast on for this week. I'm going to give that a try and see how I like it. Found it very easily, not very fiddly, working with the 2 needles. Seemed very easy. Yeah, I don't see a drawback to it. So I would love it if you try this, or if you have tried it in the past, leave me a comment down below. During the live, a few people were saying they've done the Turkish cast on, but they've only done it with 1 needle. That is going to be my homework for this week. Is I'm going to do a little bit of research and see what the Turkish cast on is with 1 needle. And next Monday night, we'll come back and we'll talk about that. So if you have done Turkish cast on with 1 needle, I would love to know that as well. Backwards knitting. Let me grab my work. Okay, backwards knitting. I've grabbed my little sample here. This is what I was working on earlier tonight during the live. Stockinette and a little bit of garter stitch. Backwards knitting. The only time I have used backwards knitting is when I have been doing an entrelac project. If you're not familiar with entrelac, I have a little sample here. I was looking for I have a beautiful color, not a colorwork scarf, but a beautiful scarf done in entrelac out of a ball of Noro. And you know with Noro, you've got beautiful long colorway stripes, and it knits up in entrelac really pretty. But this is just a sample of what it looks like in a solid color. When you're working entrelac, you are working one of these little, well, I call them panels. You knit these panels individually. So I think, I'm not sure what we have, maybe 6 stitches wide here. You're knitting all these 6 stitches back and forth in stockinette, which means you're knitting a row, you're turning it, and you're purling a row. And if this is a big, well, even if this was a scarf, it's still a lot of turning back and forth. And if this was a whole Afghan, because entrelac looks really nice in Afghans and pillows and scarves. Those are my 3 favorite projects for entrelac. If you had hundreds of stitches on a long circular needle to do an Afghan, and you had to turn that big project every 6 stitches, it gets heavy and it's a lot of turning. So if you can knit backwards, that eliminates you having to turn every 6 stitches to work a purl row. It's really kind of slick. So let's show you how you do that. So my little sample here, I am perfect. I am set up to work. Let's switch back to stockinette stitch. So I have just worked across my row going front way. I will try to talk frontwards and backwards. So frontwards is just our normal way of knitting. I have come across my needle, I've knit my last stitch. Typically now to make stockinette, I would turn it around and have the needle with the stitches on in my left hand, my empty needle in my right hand, and I would purl back. This time I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave the stitches on the needle in my right hand and have my empty needle in my left hand. So we're backwards to what we would usually do. So let me go back. So I just finished this row. I'm not turning, kind of like I-cord where you'd never turn your work. Now I'm going to take my empty needle. I'm going to go into the first stitch on the needle, but I'm going to pick up the back loop. And I'm going to wrap around my knitting needle counterclockwise, the same as we do for regular knitting. Pull it through and up and slide the stitch off. So left needle tip goes into the stitch through the back. We wrap it counterclockwise. We scoop under and up and slide the stitch off. So backwards knitting, it eliminates the need for turning the work and needing to work a purl row. We can just backwards knit back to create that purl row that we would normally do to make stockinette stitch. And this gets really easy. The more you practice it, at first you maybe think, oh my God, this is literally backwards. But I find you, just like any knitting, you get a rhythm to it. Needle in, wrap counterclockwise, slide it off. Needle in, wrap around, counterclockwise and off. So it is just a really neat little trick to have. Just so you don't have to be turning your work back and forth all the time. So I'd love to know if anybody else has used this in any other situations. I was trying to think, other than in entrelac, what would be a time you would use this? Like, would you use this for doing short rows? Short rows, like shaping in the shoulders of a sweater, short rows in a shawl, short rows in a heel of a sock. I'm not sure. I have only used it myself for entrelac, so I would like to know. I'm curious to know if people have used it in other situations. So there you go. So you can see my purl bumps on the back. I just knit backwards across the row, and there's the starter stockinette. So now I am back to knitting forward way, the way we normally do. So I'm just going to go across the row really quick, just how we normally do. So to make stockinette this way, everything does truly seem backwards because we're making stockinette stitch, but we are knitting both directions. Typically, when we were doing regular knitting, if we knit one row and knit the other row, we make garter stitch. When we're knitting backwards, we are making stockinette stitch. So it's just an interesting little concept. And I know most people aren't going to use this super often, but I think it is just fun to realize that you can do it if you want to. So I just finished my row. I'm not going to turn my work, and I'm just going to knit backwards, back across this row. So empty left hand needle, which seems really awkward and totally different than what we're used to, comes in the back loop of the stitch, wrap around counterclockwise, and pull it through. I always find the first stitch is a little fiddly. Now what I will show you is as I was working this and practicing this, I thought, this really seems like I'm knitting continental. Now, this is just totally my own thoughts on this. But when you're knitting backwards and you have the yarn in the right hand, it feels like you're picking your stitches as if you do continental, because the needle tip is coming in the stitch towards the right hand where the yarn is, and you can just wrap it around and knit it off. As opposed to when we're doing our I don't like the word normal knitting way, but our regular knitting way, continental it was when we have the yarn in the left hand and the needle's coming through and we can just pick it. So now let me show you how it is if you want to, if you are a continental knitter and you're knitting backwards. This really has the feel that you are throwing the yarn around the needle and pulling it through. So it's just interesting. So you can knit backwards with the yarn in either hand, whatever is comfortable for you. But yeah, it really does have this feeling that everything is backwards. But it is pretty slick little trick to be able to do. And just for fun, I can show you how you can purl backwards. I'm not really sure why you would want to do that, because the purpose of doing the backwards knitting is just so you don't, like, I suppose maybe it's just because you're not needing to turn your work, but it also eliminates the need to purl, which I have no problem doing. I knit and purl the same. I know some people would prefer to do the knit stitch all the time. So there we go. There's some stockinette without ever having to purl and without ever turning your work. Now, if we wanted to do a garter stitch, I'm going to just knit across. I'm back here knitting forwards, how we regular do our knits. So I'm just going to knit quick across this row the way we normally do. And then if we want to do garter stitch in the knitting backwards, we have to purl back. So I'll show you how you do that. And it's a little different too, but it's not hard at all. So I get to the end of my row, knit the last stitch, and I don't turn my work. So to do a purl, a backwards purl, we want the yarn at the front, just like we normally do when we purl. We want the yarn at the front. Our needle tip, though, comes in the back of the stitch from behind through the stitch, and the needle tip is pointing right towards you. And then you're going to wrap it. And then you're going to pull it through, under and up, and slide it off. So again, you take the needle tip and you're kind of swinging it around behind your work. You're coming in the back of that stitch, and the needle's pointing right towards you. You wrap it and you pull it, purl it through the stitch, under and up and off. Needle tip comes to the back. You come through this back stitch. There we go. And then you purl it. And I'll just keep going across the row, and then I'll show you that we'll have made a garter stitch ridge. I think this is fun, just the fact that it's different, and just to know that you can do it if there was ever a situation you thought you needed to or wanted to give this a try for whatever reason. So I'll show you how this makes the garter ridge, and then I'm going to show you my finish from last week. Last week's New Start Monday knit, the Instagram poll was whether my two colors of dishcloth cotton, my Brunette Handicrafter, the teal and the tangerine colorways, if I should do a Fair Isle dishcloth or a Fair Isle pot holder. And pot holder went out. So I will show you what I knit up in just a second. I've got 2 more stitches here. Wrap and pull through. So I've purled backwards, and there is the start of the garter stitch ridge, which will look similar to those ones down there. So this whole little sample has been knit doing the backwards knitting. Very fun, very easy. I probably right now, unless somebody has some good ideas about, oh my goodness, sorry, well, a runaway ball of yarn. Any good ideas? Like, do you do this on a heel of a sock for any reason? I don't know. I'd be curious to see if anybody's done it in any other situations other than the entrelac knitting. But that's my little tips on knitting backwards for you. My finished project from last week. Let's take a quick look at that and talk about it. So I just mentioned that you guys had voted for a pot holder. I've got little little bits of yarn here around here. It's just sitting on the back of this. So here it is. I just knit it in this really fun diamond pattern. I'll go over how I did this. Let's back up. Last week I had said I wanted to knit this on a 16-inch circular needle and knit it as a tube. I had thought I was going to do the provisional tubular cast on. In my head, that sounded like it would work. In reality, it did not. I could have made it work if I had opted to do magic loop or knit with 2 circulars, which I didn't want to do. I really wanted just to knit this in the round on a 16-inch needle without fiddling with cords and cables and things. So I had to switch my cast on. I had originally had a 16-inch needle, and I did do the provisional tubular cast on the 16-inch needle. But so picture that as being like the stride of a sock too. You've got this much work, and I wanted to flip it up. It would not go around the 16-inch circular needle to do a tube. If I had split it in half on magic loop, I could have knit it flat wise. That would have worked. But I don't know, for some reason I had it in my head. I didn't want to fiddle with that. So I just backtracked and I took out the tubular cast on, and I just used one of my 16-inch needles. It doesn't matter, that I was using for the Turkish cast on. I knit this on. I just did a regular long tail cast on. So, and I joined it in the round. I had 64 stitches, so I just knit literally a tube. It looked like a small hat all the way up. And I worked 5 pattern rows. I held the green yarn in my left hand. So if you're looking at this, when I look at this, the green color is the first one that pops out at me. If I look at it long enough, the orange, I can make that look like the dominant color. But when I, put it down and I pick it up, the first thing my eye sees are those green diamonds. And that goes back to our talk last week about color dominance. So the teal color was in my left hand. The tangerine was in my right hand. All throughout this project, I knitted in the round, and I added this little teal dot in the center of the orange. I had originally not planned on that. I was just going to do the teal diamond with the tangerine dot, and the tangerine diamond was just going to be plain, just to differentiate between the 2 patterns. But then I decided for this one, I would put the little teal dot in here as well, because then that eliminated the need to catch the float on that row. So this is a great pattern for a beginner. I'm gonna write this up. So next week when we come back, I will have this up in Ravelry is my goal. And if anybody wants to knit it along with me, you can. And it's great just because this allows you to get used to using the 2-handed knitting, or if you want to hold both strands in your left hand or both strands in your right hand, you can just focus on yarn control, I guess, holding your yarn and getting your tension and not having to worry about catching any floats. On this tangerine color, there was 7 stitches through there, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So instead of catching the float in the center, I just knit with the teal, carried the teal over and knit with it, as opposed to just catching that teal float on the back. So that just made it one less thing for a beginner Fair Isle knitter to have to worry about. Once I got up to where I thought it was pretty much square, I just Kitchener stitched off the top. 2 live ends on my needles. My circular, I kind of did then pull it into a magic loop kind of thing, split my stitches and pulled my 16-inch cable out. So I had half my stitches and half my stitches, and then cut a tail, but 4 times. Make sure you leave a long enough tail. You don't want to get caught short with yarn when you're Kitchener stitching. So I think I left about 4 lengths width of yarn, snipped my tail, put on a darning needle, and then just Kitchener stitched the top closed. Then I had to backtrack to close off the bottom because I had just cast it on. Because I had originally thought I was just going to kind of whip stitch the bottom closed. And then I thought, nope, I don't want to do that. So I went back with my needle. I picked up stitches along the one half and with another needle tip picked up stitches along this half. So I had basically now kind of fake live stitches on my needle, pulled off, and again, another length of yarn, and I Kitchener stitched the bottom closed. So it is a little bulkier in here because I have those cast on edges are folded inside, and then I've just tucked those inside and Kitchener stitched them inside. So, but you know, it's not too bad. I can feel the difference, but it's not too bad. For my prototype, I'm pretty happy with it. So the next time I cast this on, which I'm going to do, so I guess technically I've got 2 new projects. I'm going to use this yarn. This is another Big Ball of Bernat Handicrafter. Don't know the colorway. This is some Lily Sugar and Cream. These have been in my stash for a while. So I'm going to do this again. Do the diamond pattern. I think I'm going to make my background the navy and have the light blue be the diamond colors. That's my plan for this one. I'm going to cast it on with a provisional cast on so I can just come back and Kitchener stitch the bottom and not, because you don't want to really, you come back and pick up cast on stitches edge. I mean, that was a good workaround, but you don't want to do that on purpose, right? You don't want to have that extra bulk in your work. So this one, I will do a provisional cast on, and I will I'll take pictures throughout the week and put them on Instagram and Facebook so you can kind of see the progress. And then we'll come back next week and we will chat about it some more. But I really liked having a quick and simple new start last week because I was able to start and finish. I was able to do this in a day, which made it a great project. And I'm thinking that these will make great gifts down the road, hopefully for Christmas this year. I had a lot of fun doing this. So I think I'm going to do a few more of these diamond patterns and maybe work out another simple colorwork pattern, stranded knitting pattern, and share that with you guys as well if you'd like to make these for your kitchen, or maybe make these and put them in your gift box for some gift giving. That has been my week of knitting, everybody. I think I'm going to wrap up the video right here. So I hope you have a great weekend. Great week. Well, a great weekend too, because I'm going to be back here Thursday night with Jocelyn from Northern Knits Podcast. She and I are going to be talking about sock knitting and specifically crocheted sock knitting. A commenter had asked Jocelyn 2 weeks ago when we were doing our Whip Challenge podcast about what are crocheted socks like? How are they to work up? How are they to wear? And we thought, well, this would be a perfect topic. We'll just come on here and we'll do a live. You guys can chat along with us. And Jocelyn's going to talk about the crocheted sock that she's working on. So we will be back here Thursday night. I will be back here live Friday night in the Fiber Friends Facebook group. And seems like I'm around here on YouTube quite a bit this week. Cheryl and I will have a new Fiber Friends podcast up Friday night. And then I will be right back here again on Monday for another episode of New Start Monday Knits. So have a great knitting week. I hope you have lots of time. I hope you maybe get something finished and maybe also cast something on along with me. Happy knitting, everybody, and I will see you all soon.